Hello and welcome to the April program of the Academy of the North American Unitarian Association. A special welcome for those who are just joining us for the first time. Um, the NAUA, or the North American Unitarian Association, is dedicated to supporting and promoting the practice of liberal religion by embracing freedom, reason, and tolerance, rooted in our commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of every person and all peoples. The NAUA Academy offers monthly programming on issues of concern in contemporary society from our religious liberal perspective. My name is Stephen Palmer, and I'm a member of the NAUA Academy Advisory Board. I'm joined this evening by Terry Anderson. Terry is doing the technical support. Terry is located in Edmonton, Alberta, while I am located in Woodbridge, Connecticut. If you are willing, I hope you will add your own location after your name, as I have done. We are becoming a truly international organization with participants and members not only from all over the United States and Canada, but from Central America, South America, Europe, and even Africa. It is interesting to see the geographic spread of our audience. So if you would like to rename yourself by adding your location, you can do so by clicking the three dots next to your name in the participant list or in the upper right-hand corner near your picture. Our speaker this afternoon or evening, depending upon where you happen to be at this time, is Bruce Knotts. Bruce's presentation is entitled "How Migration Really Works: Facts About the Most Divisive Issue in Politics." The program is based on Bruce's own extensive experience and expertise in the area of immigration and refugees, and he will also refer to the work and recent book of Professor Hein de Haas, an internationally recognized expert on migration. Professor de Haas is a professor of sociology at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands and was a founding member of the Migration Institute at Oxford University. Our speaker this afternoon, and my good friend Bruce Knotts, has extensive experience related to migration and refugee issues. In the interest of time, I can only give a few highlights of Bruce's career. He served as U.S. government Regional Refugee Coordinator in West Africa, held numerous positions in the U.S. Foreign Service in many different African countries, including being Deputy Chief of Mission in the Gambia. After he retired from the Foreign Service, he served as the director of the UN Office of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Currently, he is a member of the adjunct faculty at New York University School of Social Work, where he teaches a course on refugees and immigration issues. We are very fortunate as well to have Bruce as a member of the advisory board of the NAUA Academy. You will note that we are recording this presentation, which will be about 45 minutes to an hour long. The recording will be available soon on the NAUA website, naunitarians.org, if you have friends or colleagues who have missed this presentation. For those joining us live, at the end of the presentation, we will stop the recording and move on to a question and answer period of about 20 minutes. And that will be followed by breakout rooms for approximately another half hour. this gives you an opportunity to discuss the issues further and actually get to meet some very interesting people as well. During the presentation, again, I ask that you remain muted so that there's no interference by noise. So without further ado, I will turn the program over to Bruce Knotts.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. It's really an honor to be part of this group. When the UA basically destroyed its office at the United Nations, I called my good friend Barbara Beach and I said, where can I join the resistance? And she said, you need to talk to Todd Edclough, and I've been around here ever since. So I'm really happy to be part of this group that is upholding our liberal religions. I still maintain a very strong presence at the United Nations, representing the International Convocation of Unitarian Universalist Women. So I'm still representing Unitarian Universalists, and I'm on so many committees, more than I have time to mention, but I'm chair of the Committee on Disarmament, Peace, and Security. We just had a meeting yesterday on LGBT rights of the NGO Committee on Human Rights, but I won't go any further. Let me get right into the topic. I was the Regional Refugee Coordinator for West Africa. And of all the things that I did in my 25 years as a Foreign Service officer, my time as a refugee officer was by far my favorite. And I didn't think it would be. I was actually told that's not a good career move. It doesn't get you promoted. And yet I took the position, and I look back on it, and it's the thing that I love the most, and it's what I continue to do as a adjunct professor at NYU that teaches refugees and migration. So I sort of, gave poor Terry and Stephen a really hard time earlier today. I changed my whole program. So things are kind of in reverse order than what we had agreed to previously. But I wanted to mention some experiences that I had as the Regional Refugee Coordinator for West Africa. And there was a time I was in Guinea Conakry, as we called it, Conakry being the capital of Guinea. And they were getting refugees from both Sierra Leone and Liberia. And both those countries were experiencing civil wars, and towns were being destroyed, people were being killed, just awful things were happening in both countries. And I was in Guinea, and a lot of refugees were coming out of the conflict area from Sierra Leone. And I saw this woman, and I saw her with a couple of small children. And I said, how old are your children? And she said, they're not my children. They were running around when our village was attacked, and I picked them up to take them out of harm's way. I hope somebody did the same for my children. And that's been one of the most poignant experiences that I've ever had as a refugee officer. Another thing that I saw, there were times when I saw lots of refugees coming out of a village, and I could see the smoke rising from the village where it had been destroyed and burned, and people were running away from their village because there was nothing left there. And they would come up to me and to other people working for the Office of Refugee Affairs of the United Nations. And what really amazed me was the first thing they asked for is, what are we going to eat? That didn't amaze me. That's what I expected. The second thing they asked for was education for their children. And this is something I've seen with refugees and migrants around the world. A lot of adults will put up with an awful lot of hardship, but when they see their children and their children's education being compromised, that's when they decide it's time to leave and seek a better life, because they don't want their children to be compromised. So all the refugees, all the migrants I've ever worked with really cared a lot. I wanted to make sure that their children's education would be able to continue even in a refugee camp. Another really interesting experience that I had as a refugee officer was the visit of Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner. At the time, he was head of the House Judiciary Committee. He's a very, very conservative Republican from Wisconsin. And everybody at the American Embassy in Abidjan, where I was posted, were laughing because they knew that I was a very left-wing liberal. And here I was going around with one of the most conservative members of Congress that ever came. And anyway, so I took him all over the place. And we went into these refugee camps, and some of these refugee camps had like 40,000 refugees. And he would put up his hands and say, "Oh my God, what are we going to do to keep these people from coming to the United States?" And I said, simple, take care of them where they are. Make sure that they have decent housing and food and income generating projects and schools for their children. Make sure their lives are decent where they are and they won't be so anxious to come to the United States. So I want to talk about a couple of UN global compacts, as they're called. And the first one is the Global Compact on Migration. And I'm actually going to put this in the chat so you can see it and refer to it. This Global Compact basically calls for orderly ways for people to migrate, so the people will be safe and can migrate with dignity. And the next one that I want to refer to is the Global Compact on Refugees. And both these global compacts mention the obligation of the rich countries of the world to really play a role. If we really don't want people coming to the United States, as Jim Sensenbrenner, and I've just put these in the chat, as Jim Sensenbrenner did not want all of these refugees coming to the United States, then we need to take on the obligation of taking care of them where they are. The vast majority of migrants migrate to the country next door. We think everybody's trying to migrate to the United States. That's just not true. Venezuelans have one of the largest migrations because their government there is really terrible. It's a messed up country. We are getting a lot of Venezuelan refugees or migrants in this country, but you know where most of them go? Most of them go next door to Colombia. And that is true all over the world. Ugandan refugees that are leaving Uganda because of the Kill the Gays bill and their LGBT, they mostly move to Kenya, which is next door. That's what most refugees do. And what these global compacts state is that if we really don't want these people coming to our country, then let's fund those countries that are hosting them and make sure they have decent housing and education and income generating projects and all the things that they need to have a decent life where they are. Another example that I tell my students is Lebanon. 25% of the people in Lebanon are Syrian refugees. We go crazy with the number of migrants we have in the United States. Imagine if 25% of our population were migrants. We'd be pulling out our hair and going crazy. And Lebanon has a really hard time, particularly in providing decent education for all of the refugee or all the migrant children. And what the UN is saying is because Lebanon and other countries are hosting these migrants and hosting these refugees, if we gave them some money and gave them the support that they needed to have decent schools and to have decent housing and to have income generating projects, then these people would not be getting on boats and crossing the Mediterranean and dying in the process in many cases, trying to get to Europe. So I put these in the chat just for your perusal, and this is exactly what I told Jim Sensenbrenner. I said, if we spent the money to take care of refugees where they are, or migrants where they are. And there are most of them are in refugee camps or in migrant camps in the country next door from where they were. They're not in the United States and they're not in Europe. Yes, there are people that go to both those places, but most people are in the country next door. So I want you to take a look at it. The other thing I also mentioned to my children, we are spending billions of dollars on border security. And for a lot less money that we spend on border security, we could be supporting the countries that are hosting migrants and have refugee camps and have them have the resources that they need to provide a decent situation for these migrants in Colombia, in Kenya, in these countries where migrants are. We're going to go to some videos here in a minute, but I do want to think about the obligation that we have as a rich country and all of the rich countries. If we really want to deal with the migrant crisis, we should really be helping the migrants where they are. And they are in a lot of places. We don't really realize it. We've been looking at this terrible situation with Israel and Palestine, but most of the Palestinians are also considered refugees. And there is UNRWA, which is a UN agency which takes care of Palestinian refugees. And again, if they had decent housing and education, they may not have the situation that we have now. I don't know if that's true or not, but at least it's worth a try taking care of people rather than having the kind of conflict that we have going on. I want to look at a very small PBS video. It's about 35 seconds, and I think Terry will show that to us, and then I'll have a few comments after that.
And hope you can see that and start playing.
Here in the middle of the Suchiate River, which is essentially a very narrow and shallow crossing between Guatemala behind me and Mexico ahead. And people and goods regularly move back and forth here all the time. We've also seen a number of migrants who use this as their crossing from Guatemala into Mexico, families from Venezuela and from Haiti. There's a couple of areas here we can't show you, though. Further afield beyond the bridge right over there is an area in complete control of the human trafficking networks. They tend to move people from much farther afield, from countries like India and China and Congo.
Hein de Haas, who did this report, is absolutely amazing.
American women who went to work during World War II.
Oh, sorry.
It said we.
Oh, I think, yeah. She speaks almost all the languages of the migrants. She speaks Spanish, she speaks Urdu, she speaks Pashto, and so she's able to talk to these migrants at the border and find out what's really going on with them. And I really respect her reporting. And she's done a whole series of reports on the refugees at the southern border. And I want you to notice that the refugees at the southern border are not just folks from Latin America. They're coming from the Congo, from Africa, from Asia, from all over the world. One of the refugees that I worked with, she was a Ghanaian woman. She was a soccer player, is a soccer player. That's what she loves to do. She was caught having with her girlfriend in the shower at the place where she played soccer, and her family wanted to kill her for that. They were a Muslim family and they wanted to kill her because she was a lesbian. And so she went to Colombia, and from Colombia, she walked all the way across Central America, all the way across Mexico, up to the border in California, where she was taken and put into a detention camp. And it was actually a Unitarian Universalist that got her out of the detention camp and said, "Do you have any relatives here in the United States?" And she said, "Yes, I have relatives in the Bronx." And so this Unitarian Universalist sent her there. So that's how she wound up here in New York City. It's amazing what people are doing, and it's a lot of people are coming to our southern border from very, very far away, like from Ghana and like from Asia and all sorts of places. And they are walking. I mean, I just can't fathom this idea. And I talked to her, and she walked the whole way. She was stripped naked, she said. Everything was taken away from her, and yet she kept walking, and she made it to California. So we have another video that I want to show, and we'll talk about that in a second. This is another PBS, yeah.
Apologies, you're gonna have to watch an ad for PBS.
Moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
Migrant crossings on the Arizona-Mexico border have remained high this year. It's where people from all over the world come to enter the U.S. Amna Navaz joins us now from Pima County. Amna, what's the situation on the Arizona border where you are?
Yeah, Jeff, it's interesting for all the focus on Texas when it comes to our immigration conversations. It's actually been Arizona that's had one of the busiest border sections across the country so far this year, along just this 262 miles of border that stretch in what's known as the Tucson sector that we're in right now. Border Patrol here logged some 50,000 apprehensions last year. That is up from what they've seen previously as well. And that's, of course, when we say apprehensions, people crossing without authorization between ports of entry. Just last week, in fact, the sector said they logged some 17,000 apprehensions. That's more than 1,700 a day. Now, the numbers across the entire stretch of the southern border are down slightly from those record highs we were reporting on at the end of last year. But it's worth noting that even those numbers are still nearly double what they saw about a year ago. We're also seeing geographic shifts from hearing from officials and sources here, meaning there are more migrants trying to make more remote and therefore more dangerous crossings. That further stretches resources here because U.S. Border Patrol has to deploy more people further afield and often carry out rescue operations to bring those migrants in safely. Jeff?
And you reported yesterday on how diverse the migrant population is in southern Mexico. You spoke to people from all over the world. Is the same true along the U.S. border, the southern U.S. border?
Jeff, I have to tell you, never in my life did I think all my language skills would come to play on the U.S. southern border in this way. In just the last hour or so, we've been driving around maybe a 2-mile stretch of border. I've met people from Bangladesh, from Guinea, from Mauritania, from Guatemala, from Ecuador, from Nepal, from Mali, because I'm able to communicate with them both in Urdu and in French. I was able to get some details. Many of them share horrifying travels of, over weeks or months at a time. They've arrived here with nothing but the shirts on their back. All of them share stories about being robbed and assaulted along the way. They say Mexican officials in particular took their money, in some cases took their passports and phones, and they all want to know what happens next. Where can we go? Well, one of the people here to answer those questions is a man named Pastor Randy Meyer. He is with the Good Shepherd United Church of Christ. It's about 90 minutes away from here. He brought us out here because he comes here regularly. Once a week or so, he brings out water, he brings out food, he drives this stretch of the border, interacts with the migrants who've arrived and lets them know that Border Patrol is here, they will be able to help them, and then tries to communicate with Border Patrol to come pick people up. But he's also shared he's seeing larger and larger groups. Yesterday alone, groups of 150 or 200 people. It stretches Border Patrol's resources, it stretches his. It's also stretching the local officials in Pima County. Jeff?
And Amna, this all reflects shifts and increases we've been seeing for months now. Is this, based on your reporting, indicative of what's ahead?
You know, what's interesting is Pastor Meyer said that it wasn't until the last few months they started seeing people from this many countries arriving here in Arizona. That is definitely new. And the numbers, as we've seen and have been reporting, have been increasing dramatically. That is certainly new. The big question is whether this is a blip or whether this is indicative of what's to come. What we do know is that despite the drop we've seen over the last couple of months, we're starting to see that tick back up. Spring is ahead. Seasonally, that is when numbers also start to go up. The most worrying thing for people here that we talk to is that the resources to match those needs and support those migrants has also not gone up. So there's concern ahead about how to meet what is clearly a growing need without the resources to help them. Jeff?
Amna Navaz in Pima County, Arizona tonight along the U.S.-Mexico border. Amna, thanks as always. Great to see you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Again, I'm really amazed by Amna Navaz. She just does some absolutely amazing reporting. The next video that we're going to have is a 9-minute video of Hein de Haas. As mentioned in the introduction, he's a Dutch professor at the University of Amsterdam. He's also taught at the University of Cambridge. He's done an awful lot of research on migrant and refugee issues here in the United States. This is his book, and I've made it the textbook for my students at NYU, how migration really works. It's absolutely amazing. I don't want to steal too much of his thunder, but he basically says a lot of things that we're being told by the press and by our politicians just isn't true. And one of the things that a lot of people think is that the more we put border patrols and the more we try to guard our southern border, the more the refugees come. When Donald Trump was president and he had this policy of taking children away from their parents, which is just awful. And what is even worse is that they didn't do any tracking. They can't even tell you where the children are or where the parents are. They just separated children from parents without even doing the tracking. And I actually have as many of you know, my husband is African American, and he's very interested to know where his ancestors came from in Africa. And he says, you know, the stupid Americans, when they took Africans away from Africa, and they brought them here to the United States, never kept any records so the Africans could know where they came from and could go back and find their relatives. And that's exactly what we did to the children and the parents that were coming across the southern border. That's what Donald Trump did. And you know, when he did that, he did it to really terrify migrants into not coming to the United States, and migration levels went up. So a lot of the things we think are going to deter migrants from coming actually has the opposite effect. And there are quite a few other things. I'm going to let Hein de Haas talk for himself for about 9 minutes, and we'll talk a bit more about this book and the many observations that he has, which really defy most of what we think we know about migration.
Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel and I'm a professor of migration studies. I'm very excited to have here with me today a very special guest, Professor Hein de Haas, who's a professor here at Maastricht University and the United Nations University, as well as the University of Amsterdam. And today we're talking about different myths around migration. And one of the big ones is really understanding how migration policies actually impact migration and whether or not they're effective and in which ways. Hein, this is something you've actually worked quite a bit on over many years, both at Oxford and in Amsterdam and here in Maastricht. Can you tell us a little bit more about this relationship actually between migration policies and what we see happening in practice with migration decision-making, for instance?
Yeah, I think the key issue is that migration policy making quite often are knee-jerk reactions to perceived migration problems that seem logical, but don't really have the effect as they desire because they're not based on a real understanding of migration as a social process.
Yeah.
It always surprises me that, for instance, when you think about macroeconomic policies, a lot of advice is taken in of economists. So, but what happens if you raise the interest rate or if you decrease it a little bit, and a lot of modeling is being done, it's not perfect, but at least I would say the science is being taken seriously.
Yeah.
In migration policy, we often don't see that happening because migration policy often responds to a desire by politicians to be seen in control, like closing a border, imposing a visa, building a wall, or the reverse, to recruit migrants. But it's often a reaction to direct pressures to be seen by the public as being in control, or businesses lobbying for having more labor migrants in without real consideration of long-term consequences.
So that means that actually a lot of migration policy is being made without a very strong underlying evidence base.
Yeah, because
for that.
yeah, we have. I would say we have built over the last years as migration researchers internationally. The evidence is so much stronger. We have so much more knowledge about the effects of policies, but it's not always taken into account. So the migration science should assert itself more seriously, I think, in discussing and questioning some of the assumptions. Now, to come to the heart of the matter, we need to understand migration as a social process, not as a one-off movement between country A and country B, because that's where a lot of the problems begin. For instance, it seems very logical to think, well, I create a barrier. Let's say I introduce a visa or make it more difficult to get a residence permit or build a wall, indeed. You think, well, it should lead to less immigration because it is more difficult, more costly, more risky. But it doesn't take into account that people come and go. And we know from a lot of research that the most common pattern is one of circulation. Most migrants actually don't desire to stay. They go to a place to work, to study, or just to explore new horizons, and they tend to go back and forth or just have a one-off move and then go back. Now, what typically happens, for instance, if you put in a border, is that yes, on the longer term, we know it decreases inflows. On the short term, it may not, because people have social networks and families that may help them to migrate. It may even increase migration temporarily because migrants, if they realize that policies are becoming more difficult, there may be a now or never migration hike. But fair enough, on the longer term, definitely it decreases inflows. But this is the crux of the matter, it also reduces the number of people going back.
Yeah.
Because if there's no migration barriers, if you're out of work or you don't like it anymore, you go back home because that's where you know your people. It's probably cheaper to live there, and people may wait until the next opportunity presents itself and then migrate again. Now, what typically happens, and that's happened with Mexicans in the US and with North African and Turkish guest workers in Europe, the moment you put in a barrier, in the longer term, we really talk about 2 to 3 generations when family reunification is complete. It may reduce inflows, but also people don't come back anymore.
But that's also already quite a long term. First, you're already talking about not seeing a real possible effect of serious deterrence, for a couple of generations. And that's really long term that we're talking about when a lot of these policies are put into place for a short-term solution in a way.
Douglas Massey, I think he's done amazing research in the Mexican migration project. It's one of the most prominent migration scholars in the world, and through fantastic data, he's shown really very precisely how the US ended up with more migrants as a result of border closure instead of less.
Exactly. So this issue of really not almost allowing people to return or not giving them, incentives to just have their normal circulation is exactly what causes often a larger irregular migration population.
Well, that's the other issue that, that's another, apart from the fact that you may end up with more migrants in the end because it cuts off circulation. By the way, this is a huge policy dilemma. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have immigration policies. I think all modern states want to have some level of control about who's allowed to come and stay. But the dilemma is the following, is that the desire to control or limit inflows is very difficult to reconcile with the desire to increase returns.
Yeah.
So it's either or. And where the balance is depends really on the migrant group, how strong the networks are, and the factor that you just mentioned, labor demand.
Yeah.
Because behind a lot of migrations, and that's also one of the main arguments in the Age of Migration, the book we just published, is that the prime driver, if you look historically or in the current era of migration, is labor demand. I mean, we have refugees, we have other categories of migrants, but the biggest chunk of migration is primarily driven by labor demand. And that is another big discrepancy that on one hand, we see in many wealthy countries in the world, a combination of factors, which is demographic decline, declining birth rates, the native population that gets higher and higher skilled, but still continuous labor demand for all sorts of jobs, both higher and lower skilled jobs. Now, with higher skilled migrants, there's more and more, I would say, acceptance to even attract those migrants. The biggest discrepancy between rhetoric and practice is where we look at lower skilled migration. Because there, the consensus, certainly in Western Europe, the political consensus is we don't need those migrants, which labor demand in a lot of sectors of the economy. We talk about agriculture, construction, cleaning, care, and a lot of other services that structurally depend on immigrant labor. Now, if you don't regulate that through regular channels, those migrants tend to show up as undocumented migrants. The majority of whom entered legally, but then overstayed their residence permits and became undocumented. And that's why Douglas Massey argued that building a wall won't stop undocumented migration because most of these people came in by plane. And if they find a job and if they're family members, these people tend to stay.
Exactly. So that's another common misconception that, you know, most irregular migrants are crossing a border irregularly. And in fact, most are not. Most have come in legally documented and then opt in overstay visas. So I think that's another important myth right there.
The case of Morocco is another. I mean, Morocco in many ways fulfills the same function to Europe as Mexico to the United States. Since 1991, European countries have tried to stop Moroccans from coming. Migration had only increased. And it has actually, since 1991, visas were introduced for Moroccans to come to Spain and Italy. They used to circulate, just go to Spain for a few months and go back. The moment they introduced visas, permanent settlement took place. And now we see a massive expansion of Moroccan migrant populations in countries like Spain and Italy as a consequence, partly, of the border closure.
Well, Hein, thanks so much for discussing several of these myths actually within this talk. We really appreciate you being here today. I'll make sure to put some more information in the description, links to work of Hein, some blogs, his website, and also others that have been working on this topic. Thanks for being on with us today. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you next time.
So that's really a amazing research, and the book has many of what he calls the myths of migration. And, you know, we get all worked up and we say, you know, we need a bigger wall and we need to have border patrol and stuff like that. That actually causes more migration. And the other thing it causes is that people that would want to come here to work, a lot of agricultural workers. I grew up in California. We had Mexicans that came and, planted the crops first of all, and then later harvested the crops. And when they were finished with that, they would go home. And after, you know, when the season came again to do some agriculture, they would come back. And when you have the walls and border patrol, then you don't allow people to go back. And that actually forces a lot of migrants to try to get American citizenship and to stay here because you've given them no option. And the option that a lot of them would like is to come and work when there's work to be done and to be able to go home when it's time to go home. And we don't even give people that option. Another huge myth. Just in the State of the Union address, if you remember, Marjorie Taylor Greene shouted the name of somebody who had been killed by a migrant. And yeah, from time to time, there's going to be a migrant somewhere that's going to do something bad. But all of the statistics are very firm that migrants commit far less crime than native-born Americans like myself. And it makes sense. If you're a migrant in a strange country, you try to watch your P's and Q's. You're not trying to make yourself, you know, into something. I've visited China several times. I go to China, I'm kind of scared, and I really try to make sure I don't do anything wrong or say anything wrong, because I don't want to get the wrong way, with the Chinese authorities. And it's the way migrants are here in this country. And, if we really didn't want migration, which is not true, because we actually do want migration, but if we didn't want migration, we would crack down on the employers. And we're not doing that, because that's why people are coming. They're coming because there's employment. New York Times just talked about we have a lot of jobs going vacant now in the United States. It's one of the good things about our economy right now. There are a lot of jobs opening up, and there are not enough people to fill them. And a lot of those jobs are being filled by migrants. And we want them here. We want them here for meat packing. We want them here for so many things. And, if we really didn't want migrants, then we would go after the employers, and we're not doing that because we really want people to come. Both Canada and the United States have an aging population. As somebody who's 74 years old myself, I know what this is about. And that means more and more caregivers for people my age, for elderly people. Canada actually has it worse than the United States. They are aging a bit more than we are here in the United States, but both countries need more and more people that will be caregivers, that will be in care homes and that kind of work. That's one of the areas where a lot of migrants fulfill those jobs that a lot of people don't want to do, but that's where you will find a lot of people. And it's one of the reasons why Canada is fairly welcoming to migrants, because they know they need them for so many different things. We also need people here in this country. And migrants, by and large, with, not counting the one or two cases where somebody does something wrong, but they're law-abiding, hardworking. They're everything you would want anybody to be, and they contribute to our economy. They're doing the work that needs to be done, and that's why they're here. So they're again, I highly recommend the book. There's a lot to read here. It's a big book, as you can see. But there are many of the things you're hearing from our elected officials and from people in the media. They're not telling us the truth about migrants. And they're generally characterized as terrible people that are coming to ruin our country, and that's not what's happening at all. They are coming here because we want them here. We want them here to do the work that needs to be done that many Americans don't want to do. And they tend to be good people. I work with a lot of migrants here and in many other countries. And just as I am very careful when I go to China or when I go to any foreign country, but particularly a country that's a bit hostile to the United States, I tend to be really careful when I go to China. And migrants, when they come to the United States, they know they're being watched and they know they're being monitored. And so they really work hard to obey all the laws and to work really hard and to do everything they're supposed to do. And they're here because we want them here. We're here because we give them the jobs that they are looking for. And if we didn't want them, then we wouldn't let them get the jobs. And we're not about to do that because we really want them.